I'm John Gormley. Welcome to this hour of the radio program, and thank you for checking in wherever we found you on this day. Hey, this is, as a Friday feature, of course, when we turn the phones over to you on anything and everything, but we're taking a 1 hour break from all of the open session stuff to go to something we do every single month here. Delighted to have with me, we call it Ask the Premier, Premier Brad Wall, who makes himself available, whether he's on the road, whether he's in his office, in his studio, in our studios here, to talk about the issues of the day. Sometimes there might be a larger provincial issue in play. You want to let the Premier know, you agree, you disagree, you take issue with what the government's done. This is your opportunity to speak one-on-one with the Premier. Other times, there may be an issue closer to home with you that you've been following, and you think, gee, in my community, my area, there's an issue with the provincial government. Your chance to put that to Premier Wall as well. All right, Premier Wall joining us now on the phones. 1-877-332-8255 is how you get to talk with the Premier. Mr. Premier, thank you for joining us in Swift Current this morning.
Hi, John.
Walk me through the sitting of the legislature at present. There's been, in terms of a lot of us, we follow question period, we follow what's going on bills being introduced. What is the legislative agenda rolling out to be at this point?
Well, John, of course the session starts with a speech from the throne that in a general way lays out the program for the government. There's some specific things in there in terms of legislation we'd like to bring forward. Including, and you've talked about it on your show, changes to rules with respect to driving in the orange zone and penalties with respect to speeding in the orange zone. There's some specific health measures that we campaigned on, promises that we're keeping in terms of forgiving student loans for doctors who will practice in rural Saskatchewan, for nurses and nurse practitioners who will practice in rural Saskatchewan. We've actually improved, we think, on a campaign promise there by also indicating we're going to allow for some proportionate forgiveness of student loan if doctors and nurses will perhaps locate in a larger urban center but provide coverage into the rural areas if they don't want to move to smaller communities. Those are a couple of specific ideas. Of course, we announced the growth plan for the province that has some specific measures around taxation, around, for example, eliminating the wait list for adult basic education, 300 more apprenticeship positions. There's a number of items in there, and we'll begin to implement those as a part of this sitting as well, which, as you know, John, continues into the spring. So the session in our province starts in the fall. We break it in December. We come back in March and complete it throughout spring and late spring.
Premier Brad Wall with us. The decision, and this went back and forth, I noticed looking at question period, for an asbestos registry, which the province has, but the publicizing of this registry. What is your government doing, and why did it take the NDP pushing for it to be done?
Well, there had been a lot of ongoing work with respect to the registry, and the very first thing I want to say is to offer our sympathies to the family of Howard Wilms, who really made this a priority, and he lost his battle with cancer just last week, and we want to offer our sympathies to him. He deserves a lot of credit, and for many, many years, and dating back to two different governments, ours and the previous one, he has been making his case for a broader registry. So the government had been compiling its work, had provided some notice to people that for anyone in those buildings and certainly working in the buildings, best for everyone to assume that any building constructed prior to 1980 contains asbestos, and appropriate measures should be taken. So that was always the case in terms of information. We have completed a list now, however, in terms of government buildings, and it's available on the Occupational Health and Safety website. We're also working with our third parties, with partners like schools, for example, hospitals, to see how we can improve the list. But I think it's important for people to remember that any building constructed prior to 1980 likely contains asbestos, and it should be treated as such.
But on this registry, which again the province has been keeping for a while, the issue was, as I understand it, was whether to publicize it? Was that the issue in play?
I think the mode of publicizing a specific list was a concern for officials. Yes, if people got sort of a false sense of security as a result of a list and precautions wouldn't be taken, we sort of delved into the issue. The minister did, Minister Morgan, and are able to move as a result on a registry. I think it's a good example of an issue coming before the legislature being raised, and not for the first time. Obviously, Mr. Wilms had been on it for some time, again dating back to various governments. But we kind of delved into it, the minister did, and we're able to move on this registry immediately. And we're going to work to improve it. I think the minister said in the House here this last week he's going to continue to work with these partners and see if we can make it more comprehensive than it is, including private buildings as well.
Premier Brad Wall with us. This is our monthly session of Ask the Premier, November style. Now, the other issue, and you spoke to this, in fact, I think the last session of Ask the Premier, if not even earlier, the plan to roll out an arrangement where new liquor stores would not be government-owned and operated. They'd still be regulated by government, but there would be a request for proposals. Your government announcing 2 will be located in Saskatoon, 1 in Regina. A number of people on the political left are critical of this because they say it will lose money for the government. How do you respond to that?
Well, we invite them to look at the website in Alberta for their liquor distribution, where it indicates pretty clearly that from 1993, when now that's complete privatization, mind you, to be fair, and we're not talking about that here. But in terms of looking at a private model versus a completely private model in that case versus what used to be a public model in that province, so a change in their mix from public stores to all private stores, they made more money. There's overhead issues. There's other issues rather than just the margins, just the profits that are in play. We also see the opportunity perhaps to focus government resources on capital, for example, for schools and hospitals. We know there's a huge need for new schools in Saskatoon. We want to move to address those issues. And if there are any bricks and mortars being supported by government, we'd rather they be schools and hospitals and highways, not brand new liquor stores. So I think we've had a great response to this, by the way. Our MLAs are reporting back that people are saying, look, this makes sense. We can go to for the new stores, we can go to private stores. It'll be a completely transparent process. And we'll start with, as you've mentioned, 2 in Saskatoon, 1 in Regina, with the potential to look around some of the satellite communities around the larger centers, too, where growth has been really significant.
Well, and even on the political left, I mean, you've got people, like Dr. Ryan Miley, who's been, retweeting and forwarding critiques. You've got, the left-wing columnist Greg Fingus. Even if I can call it the mainstream NDP, I mean, have you been criticized in the House for this? I mean, has it come up in question period?
Oh, absolutely. The NDP completely agree with these, the NDP in the legislature, led by the critic Mr. Belanger, and certainly supported based on the heckling we heard from his caucus, simply believe that the way, the current mix of liquor retailing, which, by the way, has a huge blend of private sales already, whether it's off sales in the major centers, which exist all over the province, or special vendors, these smaller communities with stores that also have a special vendor. They sell the liquor and certain beers in small communities, by the way, and that's been that way for a very long time, for decades. So notwithstanding the fact that we already have that kind of a blend, that it works well, and yes, government makes money whether it's sold at the bumper-to-bumper in Kyle or at a full-blown store in Saskatoon. Notwithstanding all of those facts and even the experience in Alberta, they're opposed to it. It's an ideological thing to see, really, when I think, frankly, most of the people in the province, regardless of their politics, and most folks don't have, a partisan preference, would just say, look, this just makes sense for news stores at least. Let's go to a transparent process. Let's have news stores. We've seen them in other places. We've traveled, and we've seen them in other parts of Saskatchewan, and they work well.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I actually thought some mainstream NDP MLAs were, staying quiet on this, because every New Democrat I know socially thinks it's a great idea and thinks you're on the right track. But
no, not in the House.
So,
They've raised it and been very, very critical of it. They say, well, we're going to lose money, and again, the facts don't bear it out where blends have changed, and because governments, have a certain amount of overhead too in these stores. These models have worked well for us in the past. Here's the other concern I have, John. This really, I think, is a bit frustrating to hear. I think it's been mostly the union leadership say, look, if you have more private stores, these private vendors will be less socially responsible in terms of, maybe selling to minors. Now, that's offensive to every private sector individual, every entrepreneur that's currently in this province responsibly selling liquor as a licensed retailer for the province of Saskatchewan in all of those special vendor locations, some of which were approved by the NDP, and in off-sale endorsements across the province. So it's an interesting debate. We're happy to have it because we're heading down this road.
Premier Brad Wall is with us. This is Ask the Premier November style. All right, it's 1-877-332-8255. We have questions on health care, drinking age, SIAST. And you, stand by. The Premier returns with your calls next. This is News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. Premier Brad Wallace here. We call this Ask the Premier. Every month or so, the Premier joins us either in studio or on phone to speak to the people of Saskatchewan. Premier, should we take some calls?
Sure, absolutely.
All right, let's go to Mike in Regina. Mike, you're on with Premier Wall.
Hi. Premier Brad Wall. I just have a question here for you.
Sure.
I heard you were talking about lowering the drinking age. What were you guys thinking on lowering the drinking age when we should be thinking about raising it up to 21 as the states?
Right. I'll let Mike, it's a great question. 2 weeks ago, we had our annual convention, and the Saskatchewan Party Youth proposed a resolution that we should lower the drinking age. And it was debated then at the regular part of the convention and passed. I think it was a close vote. I missed the exact voting window at that point, but I think it was a close vote. So what we've said since is, look, if it's a resolution of the party, that's an important thing for us internally, but it's not a government policy. And the minister, it's important to note, the Minister of Saskatchewan Liquor and Gaming Authority, who is Donna Harpower, she's also the Minister of SGI, she was speaking against the resolution on the floor because we have real concerns about it. We've heard concerns from others as well. So we're going to take the time to consult with people. Lots of unsolicited comment already, which is great and welcomed, and whether that's come through social media or letter writing or MLAs hearing from constituents and then raising concerns in caucus. Some in favor of the lowering. I would say so far it's significantly more opposed, and we'll talk to all the groups involved, and there are many that we want to have a consultation with and before any decision is taken. But it's not. It wasn't part of the government program. It is, however, a resolution passed by the party, and so we certainly take that seriously. We'll look at consulting with others involved before any decisions made, and welcome continued input from Saskatchewan people, such as we've just heard from Mike in Regina.
Premier Brad Wall with us. This is Ask the Premier. Greg in Regina, you're on with Premier Wall.
Yeah, hello, Mr. Wall. My question is, I heard on the news here the other day about SIAST. It's so busy there and doing really good. It's 3 kids that get in. There's 2 that don't get in. I'm just wondering why they don't open up more training spots for these kids coming in instead of relying so heavily on immigration for all these jobs that we can't fill.
Sure. Greg, it's not an either-or proposition. We need to have more education happening here in the province. We need more immigration as well. That's how significant the labor shortage is going to be for our growing economy now and going forward. However, I think it's important to note that we have, as a government, over the last number of years, made significant investments at SIAST with our regional colleges, with post-secondary in general. In terms of training seats, the numbers are significantly up in trades. I can tell you in the growth plan, we've also announced that we're going to increase the number of apprenticeship positions because of exactly what Greg is raising by 300. And we understand that the number one option in terms of the labor shortage has got to be more Saskatchewan people being trained, a greater engagement of First Nations people, and that's why we've increased funding. In fact, since 2007, we've increased funding to SIAS by 21%. About $140 million, and a lot of it's gone to new seats. We know there's more that can be done, and that's why in the growth plan we're talking about new apprenticeship positions, because it's a huge opportunity, and people are wanting to, not only are people wanting to stay in the province, they want to get their schooling here for that part, but when they're done, when they graduate, we have the graduate retention program that we've introduced as a government, part of our election promises in 2007, that's got people staying in Saskatchewan, earning their tuition back as they work here in the province.
Premier Brad Wallace here. Ask the Premier. Les in Corning, Saskatchewan. You're on with the Premier.
Good morning, Mr. Wall. My question is pertaining to the Kipling Memorial Health Center. A number of years ago, it was earmarked for a new health center / seniors facility, and now there's a sign out there, but nothing's ever happened, and now we've lost a doctor out of Kipling. And to find a doctor within 100 miles out here is virtually impossible. And I'm more concerned about my father being 82 years old, and I don't know what's going to ever happen if he has a heart attack or something, because we're stuck.
Les, your MLA, Don Toth, has really made a priority of this facility. You're right. What's proposed is a hospital long-term care facility, and those facilities are important in terms of doctor recruitment and retention. I'll just deal with the doctor situation first and then deal with that specific building. On the doctor front, since 2007, when we were fortunate enough to get elected, there are 200 more doctors practicing in the province, but still a shortage. And so we are bringing, as I indicated off the top of the show, some new initiatives to forgive student loans, for example, for doctors, graduating doctors who will stay and practice in rural areas. The same is true for nurse practitioners and nurses. We'd like to see a greater deployment of nurse practitioners who can help provide some primary and important care in rural areas, but the doctor issue is huge. I had asked, I guess it'd be some months ago, about this particular facility. What I'd like to do, Les, is get an update for you, and we could report back on the next show in terms of what's happening with that particular project with Kipling Hospital and the long-term care.
All right, so put that on the list for follow-ups for next time. Premier Brad Wallace here. We have time for one question quickly. I think we do. Let's go to Daryl quickly in the Battlefords. Daryl, you're on with Premier Wall.
How are you today?
Daryl, get to your question, please.
Yeah, just wondering on the speed zones or the construction zones with the speeding control. I'm just wondering, how are they going to control that? Like, you can put a camera at the beginning of the construction zone, but by the end of the construction zone, they're back up to 80 kilometers an hour, 90 kilometers an hour again.
I think we're certainly going to rely on enforcement, and also we're going to listen carefully to contractors, as we have been from the beginning. They, of course, are there all the time, those who are working in those areas, and they've provided good advice throughout this process. So we're going to rely on them, and you might see other initiatives. We might be able to use highway traffic cars as we want to in the very difficult areas where they're seeing high incidence of perhaps speeding. We can reallocate resources. So we are starting with these increased penalties for speeding in the orange zone photo radar, and we're going to look at other opportunities to bolster that. In terms of the deployment of the cameras themselves, again, I think our officials have some ideas there, as do those who are working in those orange zones all the time.
Premier Brad Wallace here. Stand by, callers. More of your questions. Lines are busy this morning. This is News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. This is Ask the Premier, our monthly session with Premier Brad Wall, who we get on the phone or in studio. And it is your checkup as a Saskatchewan citizen on your government. You have a question, a specific issue that's been getting some time. A young guy called just a few minutes ago. All this debate going on about should the drinking age be lowered. I mean, the guy was just in his early 20s. He said, no, he doesn't want it. He wants it raised. So there are all sorts of issues, and I have a list not even yet dinted that for my questions, the Premier. But, of course, this is where you take center stage at 1-877-332-8255. Premier, before we get back to the calls, lately we keep hearing about this softening in demand of potash. We have Potash Corp, which often winds down production in different mines depending on demand, now extending 2 more mines, Allen and one in New Brunswick. What are the revenue implications? I mean, are you starting to look at the government losing money when they aren't cranking out more potash?
I think that's something that we've indicated now for some time, because that softness in demand was evident earlier on in the year, and when we released quarterly reports, of course, on our budget. And even in the quarterly report, in terms of oil revenues and resource revenues, we were adjusting them downward, still with a balanced budget, but forecasting less money from these sources. We've been talking to the potash companies, and of course, the lack of sales in China and India at this point is causing these decisions to be made with respect to the mines. It isn't something new. We've seen this in the past, but yes, the short answer is there's an implication for the budget, because the province makes money as there are potash sales. We're looking carefully at all the numbers. We'll have the midterm financial report, typically comes out in November, which reports halfway through in the government's budget. And so we'll let that report happen. But what I can tell you that in a general sense, we see, because of a growing economy, significant strength in revenues that come from different taxes, income taxes, corporate income taxes, sales taxes. We see that the benefits of a growing economy manifest themselves to a government where you don't have to increase taxes to get more revenue. You can keep that same rate, and growth provides that bump. And so We're looking carefully to see if there's a balance there. In other words, if there's enough increased tax revenue in these other areas to cover off some of the pressures in resource revenue. Looks pretty hopeful right now. And we're hopeful and perhaps a little bit more than hopeful that we're going to be able to continue with the Saskatchewan Advantage, which is the only balanced budget in the country.
Premier Brad Wall with us. Okay, other issues on my plate. I've got a lot here. We were talking earlier this morning about this Cal Tire story where, this tire plant they're looking at near the global transportation hub, and there's a bit of bargaining going on. They're dealing with the RM of Sherwood. City of Regina's got some concerns. So now you've got this business saying, geez, we don't hear in a couple of weeks, we're just going to move it to Manitoba. This opens up this whole issue of rural municipalities in Saskatchewan. Voluntary amalgamation has brought, us about 800 levels of government from 1,100. We still have a lot of government here. Is your government looking at reducing the numbers and perhaps increasing the sizes of large rural government?
Well, not in a uniform sort of formulaic way where we'd say, look, here's now, as the NDP did, here's some sort of forced amalgamation and here's the number of RMs you're going to have out there or the number of any municipalities. But what we'd say in the growth plan is we're looking very carefully at the challenges around our major centers, and it's not just the two biggest ones, Regina and Saskatoon, who have these challenges in terms of their borders and neighboring municipalities. And by the way, sometimes the challenges are on both sides of that fence. We're just saying to both of those sides, to the larger center and to the rural areas, we can't let these sorts of things get in the way of what is continued growth for the province. This is, the growth plan highlighted that pretty clearly. This is the number one imperative, that we keep growth moving, that we keep attracting companies like we're talking about right now. And so in a general way, we've just, I think, put everyone on notice that we're going to look at all the annexation rules that are currently in existence, that we're going to be carefully monitoring what's happening around major centers, so that we are not getting in the way of ourselves in terms of growth. A rural ratepayer is a resident of the province of Saskatchewan that wants to see the province grow, and so is a citizen of an urban center. And maybe we need to be thinking in those terms before we think in terms of, I'm a ratepayer in this RM, or I'm a citizen of this community. I think that probably the citizens are there. We need local governments to be there as well.
Premier Brad Wall is here. Let's go to the calls now. Sheldon in Regina, you're on with Premier Wall.
Hi, Mr. Wall. I was just wondering, with all the discussion of the private liquor vendors as well as the option of lowering the drinking age, is the Saskatchewan government ever going to repeal Article 63 in the Alcohol Control Act in regards to nude activity or entertainment?
We're looking at the updating of a lot of different liquor regulations in the province. We have, for example, we have regulations that restrict sale of alcohol on a golf cart at a golf course. We have a lot of rules and regulations that have been on the books for a very long time. In government, you should know we have a group of MLAs that are called the Red Tape Committee, and they've looked across government. They continue to do that to update regulations, and in some cases to recommend that they be deleted if they're not needed. And so in terms of the specifics of any changes that are coming, I think we're going to hear soon from the ministers in those different areas where they're looking at different red tape, different regulations, and we'll let that unfold as it happens. But it's not going to. I'm certain that you'll be hearing about that soon.
Okay, let me push a little on the whole strip club thing. That's been a controversial issue here. Some people say leave it the way it is. A lot of younger people who have spent time in Alberta say they want them here.
We're going to let the minister answer all the questions with respect to potential changes in regulations around the sale of liquor in the province.
Premier Brad Wall is here. This is Ask the Premier, 1-877-332-8255. Patty in Nokomis, you're on with the Premier.
Hi. I want to talk about asbestos. Now, if it's taken out of some of these buildings, where is it dumped? Is it a secured area? And I suggest that you just leave this asbestos alone. Do not disturb.
Well, the challenge with that, though, is that from time to time, especially government-owned buildings or buildings that are, are quasi-government buildings. In other words, they're perhaps in education or in healthcare. They need renovation from time to time. And when that occurs, then a very strict protocol is used to try to mitigate any risks around asbestos that pre-exists. And I know that those protocols exist in terms of what to do with any of those asbestos materials after the renovation is done. Excuse me, and those are followed. But I don't think we can just simply say, we're just going to leave it undisturbed, because from time to time we're just going to have to do renovations and improve some buildings that are pre-1980 and therefore have asbestos.
Callers, Premier Brad Wallace here. It's 1-877-332-8255. We are back to more of your calls in a moment. But let me grab another one on my list. Pat Fiacco was here earlier this week, the new CEO of Tourism Sask. In the legislature, it came up in question period and beyond. First of all, 40 people apparently considered for this position. Mr. Fiacco gets it. The NDP suggesting, given his flattering comments about you and the growth of Saskatchewan, that he is, quote, a shill for the Sask Party PR machine. How do you respond?
It's a surprise to the Sask Party machine. That's how I would respond. I think Mayor Pat, as a mayor, was pretty direct with the government, with the previous government and with ours, and we were engaged in a number of arguments in the media with the mayor in terms of what we had done in revenue sharing for that city and all cities, and what some of the demands were. That's just a matter of the public record. Moreover, I would say that, we have the chair of the new Tourism Saskatchewan board, by the way, is Jack Brodsky, well known to people in Saskatoon, owner of the Blades and a business leader, and just a very well-regarded man. The rest of the board are very similar in this respect in terms of tourism operators. Two from the previous board, actually, on this one as well. And a process was used, and I don't know all the details except that they did go through 40 different candidates, and they were really comfortable to recommend the former mayor. It's not a surprise, because one thing I think everyone would agree is that Pat had some real experience in terms of promotion, which is what we need. John, if I can just on tourism, just for another minute, we've seen over the last 4 years, our 4 years in government, a significant increase in government investment in tourism. In fact, we promised to add another $32 million, or an increase of 50% in tourism funding over 4 years. We beat that. It was $34 million, 50% increase in Tourism Saskatchewan's budget. And yet a lot of the new tourism success, I would say, in the last 4 years came from efforts outside of Tourism Saskatchewan. We would provide money for hosting, whether it was the World Juniors or whether it's the Junos or the CCMAs, attracting major events. We want to see Tourism Saskatchewan focus more on events. It's what we're good at. It's what generates a lot of money. We want to see Tourism Saskatchewan focus on northern products and outdoor products, fishing and hunting. It's what we're good at. Maybe, world class. And so there are some improvements we can make. For all of these new dollars we've invested over 4 years, I think there was a concern about are they being put to optimal use. We like the idea of this new structure, a crown, and they've chosen someone who's pretty proficient at promoting and leading an organization, and so I'm very hopeful about the future.
But on this question of structure, the old Tourism Sask was much like STEP and some of these other ones are. You have the government funding an extent of it. You have user groups funding it. It has an arm's length sort of autonomous relationship. By making it a crown, you clearly bring it into the aegis of government. So, is that an inconsistent message you're sending?
I don't think so. It reflects the reality. In the case of STEP, there is a real involvement by the private sector in terms of money, hard dollars and membership, and the private sector obviously leading a lot of those missions. There was that to some extent tourism, but towards the end, just take a look at the revenue. I think 95% plus of the revenue to Tourism Saskatchewan came from the government anyway, not from membership, not from sort of co-op marketing or other industry initiatives.
I thought it was like STEP, where you had a whole bunch of members paying, and raising revenue.
That was the notion originally, and even in my economic paper I wrote in opposition, I said, here's a good example of how you can get things done without another government ministry. It has worked very well with STEP. I'm not sure it worked as well with tourism, because the reality was that the great majority, almost over 90% of its money came from government in the first place. Also important to point out that while a number of jurisdictions like Saskatchewan moved to this outside sort of third party or somewhat arm's length agency, all of them, I think, except Saskatchewan, there might be one other, have gone back to a government model, whether it's a crown or some sort of special or organized enterprise within government. And so we've now done that as well. And we're going to continue to, by the way, to invest more in tourism, to focus on events, to really hopefully help develop markets for products that are well developed in terms of what we're offering, but maybe not as well known as they could be. And I'm very hopeful about the future.
Premier Brad Wall with us. Stand by. More calls. This is our monthly session of Ask the Premier. I'm John Gormley, only on News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. This is our November session of Ask the Premier. Premier Brad Wall with us. Premier, before we get back to the calls, one of our gang texting at 306-306, and I thought this was interesting. ISC, the Information Services Corporation, why is the government putting the employees in turmoil? Why is it doing what it's doing to the families? What is happening with ISC, and what happens with employees of this government corporation?
Sure, thanks. Well, John, as you know, in the last election we campaigned, and in our platform it's very explicit on a policy of very similar to the 07 campaign, where a Saskatchewan party government re-elected would continue to support something called the Crown Corporation Protection Act. We wouldn't amend it, we'd keep it as it is. That act was passed by the NDP and voted by us in opposition as well, in favor of it by us when we were in opposition. And it simply says that, look, lists all the crowns that aren't going to be privatized, period. The NDP, we know, left out ISC. In fact, we've seen the cabinet documents, and Pat Atkinson, as minister, actually expressly asked that it be removed. We also know that the NDP did some evaluations. RBC Capital Markets did some evaluations and made some recommendations about their government privatizing ISC outright to a company called Terranet in Ontario, or potentially a share offering, and this was towards the end of their term, and they never got around to it. We think ISC is a very successful land titles company. We think there might be a real opportunity for it to expand from a Saskatchewan base. In order to do that, it probably needs to be private, frankly. It needs to get some capital from the markets, and other governments who might want to use ISC's land titles expertise would be more comfortable if it wasn't a Crown. They've told ISC that because inquiries have come in from other parts of the province. So for those employees, if we take this next step, I think there'll be a couple of good advantages. One, they're going to be part of an exciting company that has more capital, frankly, access to more capital, headquartered by law in the province of Saskatchewan. They might have an opportunity to be a part of ownership in that very successful company. And if we make a change, the government's going to continue to own a large chunk of this company. A very significant part of it, and to also be a very significant player on the board. But we just think there's an opportunity like Potash and Cameco to create a new national champion, if you will, that's permanently headquartered in the province.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing here. We've had Crown corporations for so long in this province, and we've never sold any of them of any size, that there's this view that if a private owner, or if you do a share issue, like TELUS, which was the old Alberta government telephones, that all of a sudden people lose their jobs. Just because you change owners, you still need employees running the company.
There's way more people working in Saskatchewan for Potash Corp than there ever was when it was a Crown. That's true of Cameco as well, which, of course, was two Crowns, a federal Crown and a provincial Crown, now a private company, the largest uranium mining company in the world. Excuse me. And so we know that in the case of ISC, there's an interest on the part of other jurisdictions for what they do and do well, but it's important that they perhaps change their structure, ISC, so that those other jurisdictions have a comfort level that they're not, dealing with a Crown corporation from another jurisdiction. And that's why we're looking carefully at it.
Okay, one more call quickly. Rob in Prince Albert, you're on with Premier Wall. You have a question, sir.
I do. Being from Prince Albert, I am wondering, for a number of reasons, we keep hearing about how mining and everything up north is such an economic boon. We have all our northern communities that need supplies.
Rob, I got to jump in. What's your question?
Why is it taking so long to get a second bridge?
The work, the background work by engineering folks at highways, by those who do the analysis, is underway. I think the minister indicated he's close to having that report. They've done other studies in the past that have said that, look, there's just not the numbers that they have an engineering formula and an analysis that they use for when a bridge is needed, and up until this point, there hasn't been the numbers warranting a second bridge.
Premier, got to jump in.
Sorry. Okay.
Premier, thank you for this. We'll see you next month.
John, thanks. Take care.
Premier Brad Wall on Ask the Premier. This is News Talk Radio.